Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about copyrights, the arts, and Instagram. And I really have to thank my daughter for getting me interested in this topic because she's really into Instagram and even has some blue tick that she's incredibly proud of. So every now and then, I notice that she likes to post quotes that I am confident she didn't come up with on her own. And so one day, I saw this one on her account. And I went to her and asked her straight out, why do you think it is okay to post somebody else's words on your site like this? Up here in the top square are the kinds of answers she threw at me. The first thing she said, I swear, was, well, there was no copyright notice on it, Dad, so it's not copyrighted. And so I had to set her straight on that, telling her that copyright protection doesn't require notice anymore. Then she added, well, everybody's doing it, Daddy. I replied tongue in cheek, well, try telling that to the policeman the next time one pulls you over for speeding. See how far you get with that excuse. Okay, she said, well, it was out there, and I don't know who said it, and I wouldn't know who to ask for permission. It's like, oh, please. Even I know who said this. It was Grandmother Willow in the Pocahontas movie made by Disney. You know, Disney, who likes to sue everyone. Then she had two more retorts. She said, it's just one short sentence, and I'm not making any money off it. I kind of put these together and heard her trying to say that what she did was fair, or in copyright vernacular, that it's a fair use. And so you already know the factors one must consider to determine if reproducing and displaying a quote on Instagram is a fair use. For instance, we need to consider her purpose, which is not really educational or anything productive like that. But she says she's not making any money on it, so I presume it's nonprofit, which is helpful. But she isn't changing anything or doing something that would be considered transformative. It's not like she's making a search engine or using the quote in a parody or a satire. So I don't see a big positive here despite the allegedly nonprofit objective. Regarding the amount she took, well, it's true the statement only amounts to a few words, and so quantitatively it's not very substantial. But on the other hand, in a qualitative sense, this statement sums up a central theme and core concern of the movie. And we all know that Disney is fully prepared to license works to those willing to pay the price. So all I can say is that I can't be all too sure about this fair use line of her argument. Okay, well, next she tells me that if anyone complains, she will take it down. I guess on the assumption that this makes it all acceptable. What I hear her saying is, it's okay to break the law as long as I can get ahead by doing it, which is something I don't like to hear as a business professor. I spend a lot of energy explaining to my students that you can't justify breaking the law by arguing that it is profitable to do so. At the end of the day, that kind of excuse usually doesn't cut it through an ethical lens. So finally she just shrugs and says, you don't understand Instagram or its culture, Daddy. Well, I guess she's got me there. Anyway, this is just kind of a preview to what I really want to chat about here, which is this guy, Richard Prince, who is what we call an appropriation artist, which means he takes other people's artwork and incorporates it into his pieces. He follows in the footsteps of other well-known artists, such as, for instance, Andy Warhol. Among other things, Warhol used photographs of celebrities and then altered them by adding colors and making other alterations to produce new works that fetched enormous amounts of money, sometimes tens of millions of dollars. Art critics praise Warhol, claiming that he would take a common photograph and alter it so that you could see the commercial aspects of society, whether a celebrity or a household product, from a different perspective. That made the art sort of transformative, in their opinion. As far as I know, none of the celebrities ever sued Warhol or his estate for using their identities or personal images in his commercial works. But a couple of photographers sued him or his foundation, and up until recently, most of these were settled. However, recently a photographer named Lynn Goldsmith sued the Andy Warhol Foundation for Warhol's use of her photograph of the rock star Prince. And in the early stages of this suit, Warhol's foundation successfully claimed that his works were a fair use, based significantly on their transformational nature, along with consideration of other fair use factors. The other item here is a somewhat famous poster used by the Obama campaign, designed by the artist Richard Ferry. And I do see here that Ferry might be cut off for you, so it's Shepard Ferry. And this is based on an AP photograph taken at a National Press Club event. Ferry basically colored the original black and white photo and added the word hope to it. The AP sued and the parties settled, so we don't know how it would have come out. But Ferry's argument would have rested on fair use, as is typically the case for appropriation artists. So here is an example of something Richard Prince did somewhat recently. Basically, he went through public Instagram accounts and found photographs that he thought were interesting. He then added his own comments to the original post where he wanted them to appear. You can easily do this by reporting comments you don't want to see as abusive, which are then removed from your view, but not others. So he did this for most of the comments, added his own, and then took screenshots of what remained. He then simply blew it up to like 65 by 48 inches on a stark white background, and voila, he's done! Prince actually did this with 38 Instagram photographs. Most of them were just everyday people, but a few were also celebrities. So there's Kate Moss, another was Pamela Anderson, and there's another well-known star on the right. So my first reaction as an intellectual property lawyer was something like, are you kidding me? I mean, who does this kind of thing? To just take someone else's picture and add a simple statement just to be funny. And, of course, the answer is a lot of people do this kind of thing. Even you might do it with memes such as these. And I imagine you're thinking, well, these are non-commercial. So, along with the funny comments, the purpose weighs in their favor. And that is probably true. But I wouldn't necessarily assume that every time you do this, it is necessarily a lawful fair use. For instance, the penguin up there, who was called Socially Awkward Penguin, was copied from a photograph that Getty Images owns, and Getty actually once sued on the use of that penguin. And down at the bottom left, well, you've probably seen one of these videos somewhere that were made by adding subtitles to a scene from the movie Downfall. There's one for probably every football team out there made by angry fans when their teams lose, such as one I know when Washington's football team lost to Dallas. The maker of the film was upset and did file complaints about some of these, but he was simply overwhelmed by the number of videos. So, yes, these are typically not commercial enterprises, and that does make them more appropriate under a fair use analysis. But Here's the deal when it comes to Richard Prince. His works are very commercial. For instance, he did a show with these Instagram works in a New York gallery, and he sold some of these for up to $90,000. So this is far different than some funny little meme that is posted just for grins. You know, when this show opened, there was a lot of buzz in the art world, which was reported in the press. Some of the subjects were upset that Prince boldly stole their photographs and profited off their personal images without even asking for permission. Actually, this is probably a good place for you to pause and think about who even owns the pictures that you have on your phone's camera roll and that you end up posting on Instagram. So, if you take a selfie, that's pretty easy because you are both the photographer and the subject that's in it. So, whatever rights are in that photo belong to you. But what if you hand your phone to someone else and say, "Hey, will you take my picture while I'm standing in front of this sunset?" Or something like that. In that event, that stranger might be the copyright owner of that photograph, even though it's in your phone. Or maybe you should be treated as co-creators. Or maybe you own it by some implicit agreement. Anyway, this is all a can of worms that I don't want to get into here. The important thing is that Prince is definitely intruding on somebody else's copyright interests. The other kind of complaint might be from the subject in the photograph, even if they're not the copyright holder. It's a more personal thing, like, "Hey, that's me up there on a wall in New York, and Prince is making money off of me, or he has embarrassed me in a way I never expected." Of course, there are others who learned that their images were up there and they were flattered, and their reaction was more like, "Whoa, that's just so cool, man." As for the art critics, well, they were all over the lot. So I listed here just a couple quotes on both sides of the spectrum. On the favorable side are art critics that use phrases such as psychic, artistic, transubstantiation, real, unreal spaces, and no oneself is known to justify their positions. So one thing I've learned is that art critics talk with a vocabulary that I don't fully understand. It's like listening to wine critics comment on the characteristics of wine. But what I think they're trying to say is that Prince makes you look at common Instagram posts from a different perspective that gives engagement with the platform new meaning. So they are applauding Prince much as they did with Warhol. As an aside, I'll tell you what I think. You had better be careful with what you post on Instagram because you never know what weirdo may be stalking you and what he may do with your photographs. But all kidding aside, many art critics do find value in these works by Richard Prince. On the other hand, there are plenty of experts on the other side, like the one I listed at the bottom of this slide. So, you might ask, what made Richard Prince so bold that he thought he could get away with basically taking your entire Instagram picture, adding some gobbledygook comment, blowing it up, and selling it for $90,000? Well, it turns out that Prince had already tested the boundaries of fair use for appropriation art with a different exhibit, and he emerged unscathed. In this instance, he ripped images from a book by Patrick Carriou containing photographs of Rastafarians, enlarged them, pasted them onto canvases, and added other features such as colors and blue circles to the eyes, as is shown on this slide here. These were then displayed, again in New York, in an exhibit called Canal Zone, which I believe was a reference to an area around the Panama Canal where Prince was born. Cariou sues Prince for copyright infringement for taking 30 of his photographs and incorporating them into Canal Zone canvases. Under the circumstances, it's pretty clear that there is infringement unless Prince can convince the judge that his appropriation of Cariou's photographs is a fair use. And at the lower court level, he fails to do this. And a key reason that he lost was because the judge believed that the works could not be appropriately transformative unless they served to comment on Cariou, his photographs, or Rastafarian culture. Or, in other words, could be considered a parody or satire, which was central to the Supreme Court's decision in the Two Live Crew case. And Prince even admits that he didn't take the photos with some overarching objective to engage in critical commentary. Rather, he said that he was trying to make a kind of fantastic, absolutely hip contemporary take on the music scene. So, basically, he took the photos because he liked the way they would appear at his pieces. And this was not a sufficient rationale for the judge. In reaching this conclusion, the judge looked at a couple of previous cases to inform his decision. So, the first picture here is an iconic photograph of Demi Moore while 7 months pregnant that Annie Leibovitz shot for a cover of Vanity Fair. It represents, among other things, a woman's pride in her pregnant appearance. That image was then recreated into an advertisement for the movie Naked Gun 33 1/3 by basically replacing Demi Moore's head with a smirking Leslie Nielsen. Leibovitz sued for copyright infringement, but lost based on fair use. In reaching this conclusion, the court found it important that the ad was making fun of the original photograph because Nielsen's character in the movie dreads the thought of parenthood. Thus, the ad's ridiculous nature served as a parody, which justified use of the photographic image that was the target of the fun. In contrast, was a suit by a photographer against another appropriation artist named Jeff Koons, that's Koons, who found a card displaying an image of puppies on a couple's lap taken by the photographer Art Rogers. Koons then constructed a sculpture based on that photo, and Rogers sued him for copyright infringement. Koons argued fair use, but lost, significantly because his work did not convey any parody or satire. Instead, he simply found this cool little photo and made his sculpture based on it. So, looking at these precedents, the judge addressing Richard Prince and Canal Zone saw more parallels to Koons' string of puppies than the Naked Gun poster, given that neither involved some critical element that justified use of the copyrighted works. Richard Prince didn't rest with this decision, though, and appealed the judgment to the Second Circuit Court that covers New York. And the court took a lot of people by surprise when it ruled in 2013 that one can make a transformative use even without engaging in parody or satire or having any critical aim at anything at all. According to the court, it's enough if the new work creates new aesthetics or insights or has a different character than the original. And most of the Canal Zone pieces definitely meet this standard, given that the composition, presentation, scale, and media are fundamentally different than Cariou's photographs, resulting in works that are jarring, hectic, and provocative rather than natural and serene. In fact, the court ruled that 30 of the pieces were fair use for sure, while the other 5 would require greater review because the changes were not as significant, such as the 2 works at the very bottom of the slide here. Thus, this Case charted a new course for evaluating the purpose element of fair use and allows one to find a positive objective even without parody or satire. But let's be clear, though, that the purpose is only one of the four relevant factors, and works that make fun of the original probably have a higher claim to take more of the target, while also being less likely to harm its market value. Thus, although we are focusing here on the meaning of a transformative purpose, never forget that this is only one of the factors that ultimately need to be addressed. So back to the question, what makes Prince so bold? I think it's because he knows he can possibly get by simply with changing the media and scale of the Instagram posts. And of course, he adds his humorous little statements. And indeed, we have seen that some art critics likely agree, believing that he does add insights to how we might view cyberspace by changing the character of the works. So, if you were to ask me, my immediate reaction would be, oh, no way, that's a fair use. But then after thinking about it a little bit, so looking at the purpose, it is commercial, and that's a negative. But under the new standards, the works, I guess, could arguably be considered a little bit transformative. So maybe this provides some counterweight, although, I actually don't think all that much. In terms of the nature of the copyrighted work, well, look, many of these are simply selfies that are not all that creative in a copyright sense. In other words, the copyright protection may be a little thin on the creativity scale. Regarding the amount taken, well, perhaps Prince had to take the entire Instagram photo to give some insights about these real unreal spaces in cyberspace. And when it comes to market value, well, many of these subjects posted their photos on Instagram without ever thinking that they may someday license them. So for them, maybe there is little economic consequence. I put Green Day up here, not only because I really like Green Day, but they were sued for using this iconic Scream image designed by the street artist Derek Seltzer in the background of a music video. The band prevailed in part because the red cross transformed the character of the image by overlaying it with religious symbolism. So maybe this comes close to what Prince did. But after thinking about these works in terms as favorable as I can muster on Prince's behalf, I still just can't help but conclude that Prince stepped over the line of what might be considered a fair use. So, is it a fair use? Well, no, I just don't think so. Okay, that takes care of the copyright issues. But Richard Prince may also have to deal with individuals who may be unhappy that their personal images are permanently plastered on enormous canvases for the public to see. So this is going to come down to what we call personal rights. And the ones that I want to at least raise here are elements of privacy rights and associated publicity rights. So the first three I listed here consider the emotional damages that may result from intruding on an individual's personal privacy. And the short answer here is that I don't think these will apply in this instance. Most of these images were voluntarily posted on a public Instagram feed. And so it would be hard to argue that the canvases somehow revealed or intruded on private matters in an offensive way. Perhaps there could be a defamation claim regarding some of the edgy comments, but I sincerely doubt it. That leaves the final bullet that addresses what we call publicity rights. which involves the appropriation of someone's name or likeness for economic advantage. Often these disputes involve people who incorporate the names or identifying characteristics of celebrities in advertising to make it appear that they endorse the products. The basic concept is that I have invested in my personal reputation, and then somebody commercially takes advantage of the recognition and personal goodwill that I've established without my permission. Publicity rights are established by the individual states and are governed by state law, and so their extent and limitations vary across the country. Some states, such as California, are somewhat expansive with publicity rights, and actions may potentially be raised by those that are not famous in a traditional sense. For these reasons, anyone who intends to use another person's image as part of a commercial transaction, whether in advertising or as part of a product or service, must at least be wary of potentially violating publicity rights. Having said this, there are several exceptions which permit commercial businesses to safely display such images, such as for news reporting or social commentary, typically for reasons based on notions of free speech. For instance, you can imagine trying to sell a humorous t-shirt that includes a picture of Nancy Pelosi, which is the kind of thing that should be allowed under the First Amendment. So I have to tell you that the analysis for permissible exceptions here is very similar to that used with fair use for copyright, and focus heavily on notions of transformation. And the fundamental question for our purposes comes down to whether the product simply depicts the individual, or whether the likeness has been so transformed with different meanings that purchasers buy the new work due to the expressions of the artist. For instance, that t-shirt on the top left depicting a lithograph of the Three Stooges violated publicity rights because, at the end of the day, it is little else than a picture of the Stooges, and doesn't do anything transformative, such as through commentary or the like. Contrast that with the poster on the right with Tiger Woods at its center. Woods sued, claiming, "Hey, you are selling that poster because your buyers want that picture of me." But he loses this case because the artist incorporates Woods with the images of other great champions, such as Nicklaus, along with a scoreboard and caddies, thereby making a transformative work about the history of the great tournament. I also included more recent litigation that you may know about that involved several college athletes who sued EA Sports for including their images as avatars in its video games. I actually think that this was a close call, but the players ultimately won, persuading the court that the games did not make a transformative use of their images, despite the clear change in platform and objectives, because they still appeared as football stars competing in the game of football. So EA Sports lost these lawsuits, which greatly affected commercial interests involved with developing video games. And I should mention that it does say non-transformative down there to the right, which has been cut off by my image here. I guess I should have reviewed these slides a little bit more before I put this video together for you. So I apologize about that. So, circling back to Richard Prince and his Instagram exhibit, let me just throw this out. Remember that publicity rights are governed by state law, and this exhibit took place in New York, so that's the law that will likely apply. And in New York, its law provides that one cannot sue for use of a personal image in limited edition artworks. So that means Prince is probably off the hook here for possible publicity rights violations. Of course, even if some individuals sue Prince, and let's just assume for now prevail, the final issue is, what can they get for it? Or in other words, what financial risks does Prince bear by hanging this exhibit? One possible remedy that his accusers might seek is an injunction to prevent the sale of the painting. Of course, he's already sold some, and they're gone. So this would only apply to works that have not yet been transferred. And if you think how easy these works are to make, my guess is that his reaction would be, fine, okay, whatever. I'll just find another cool Instagram photo, add a comment, enlarge it, and ta-da! End of story. So I don't think he fears this remedy all that much. Then there is the issue of damages, which comes down to how much money did I lose because you made that canvas? And my guess is that for most of these, the answer will be very little. This is Instagram, people. How many of you have a track record of selling or licensing your photos? It's going to be hard to prove your actual losses. Fortunately, for copyright infringement, there is a possibility to recover statutory damages. And here's an example of why they may be so important, because they give the judge the discretion to award up to $150,000. But remember, you must have registered your work within 3 months of uploading or prior to the infringement to recover. And well, only professional photographers likely do that with their Instagram posts. But hey, Prince is making around $90,000 for using my picture, so can't I get his profits? And the answer is a qualified yes, meaning you can get the portion of Prince's profits that is attributable to the use of your photo or image. And the problem is that most of the value in his works derives from the fact that he is the artist, and not so much because your picture was used. So again, I don't think that this really scares him. At the end of the day, I imagine that Richard Prince might do a financial cost-benefit calculation. And given the upside of selling most of the works for enormous sums without complaint, while suffering only minor losses to those who might sue him, he determined that this would be a profitable enterprise, despite potentially, indeed I would say very likely, violating the law. So, given that this exhibit will turn out to be a moneymaker for Prince, I have to ask, does this mean that he is ethical? Well, I think I know how Grandmother Willow would respond. She'd say,
Richard, I'm so disappointed in you.
And I'll tip my hand. From an ethical perspective, I am disappointed in him as well. And I know that I'm not totally alone, because a couple of individuals did end up suing him. The most important involved a professional photographer named Donald Graham, who sued for this picture on the left of a Rastafarian smoking a joint. And in a preliminary court proceeding, the judge indicated that Prince's work was not a fair use, in line with my own personal feelings about the issue. Well, that's the end of this story about Instagram, copyrights, and publicity rights. It's just one of the long line of examples that highlight the increasingly difficult relationships that arise when old laws meet new technologies.